My name's Josh. I'm a co-host on The Imperfects, the son of Sri Lankan and English immigrants, and I call Australia home. I'd like to recognise the traditional peoples of this continent whose land was stolen nearly 250 years ago. In particular, we at The Imperfects would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast was recorded, and we extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I'm inspired by the strength and endurance of the world's oldest living culture, and we at The Imperfects pay homage to the traditions of story when we share stories on our podcast. The Imperfects is not a licensed mental health service and is not a substitute for professional mental health advice, treatment, or assessment. The advice given in this episode is general in nature, but if you're struggling, please see a healthcare professional or call Lifeline on 131114.
Quick! Is anyone here a doctor? Yes, her name is Dr. Emily, and she's a psychologist. Please welcome to The Imperfects, our very own psychologist! Well, we are back.
We certainly are.
Well,
you are. You are in a big way.
Well, we are already back. We've been back for a while. But the very exciting thing is Dr. Emily is clearly back. But not only back, usually you're on Zoom, Em, but you're here in the studio.
Em did what she did to you, everyone, last year over Zoom. She's actually here in person now.
Yeah.
So God knows what she's going to do to you this year.
Yeah, God knows.
Thing to say. Em, you are, in all seriousness, you've got fans. I have so many people come up to me telling me how amazing you are. It's really lovely. I had one late last year, which I've been meaning to tell you guys, but haven't got around to it. Wasn't my favourite time to be told. I was so this story is very quickly. I had to go to. I had a fancy dress party and I had to go and buy a skivvy. I try and find a skivvy, and they're very hard to find in Melbourne in December. And I ended up
Specifically in December?
Well, I think summer people are buying skivvies.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha. Yeah.
And
They're
so,
more of a February kind of March
yeah, I think so.
item.
Anyway, when I was there, I had this thought of, do you know what? This might be a good place to. I had been thinking recently I'd like to change the clothes that I sleep in, and I have recently been thinking.
Love the detail you give.
Well,
It's clearly important.
No, well, it is because what I decided I'd maybe like to start wearing. Josh would be familiar with.
I know where you're going with this.
I would like to start wearing man nighties to bed.
Mate, I have one.
What?
I
You
have
sleep
one.
in a man nightie?
I don't anymore, but for a while, it's and I love it. but the problem I found with a man nightie in bed is you get tangled up in it. Like there's too much flowing fabric happening. Like so you know, theoretically, obviously you look at yourself and you're like, this is cool, I'm in a man nightie, obviously.
In theory, yeah.
In theory and in reality, like you look at yourself, like, I'm in a man nightie. This is like, it reminds me of when I was in grade 2, I played Scrooge, and Scrooge, in the Christmas, what is he called?
Christmas Carol.
Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
I played Scrooge. And so I had like the man nightie with holding the candle and the little sleep beanie thing.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of that. So I can tell you, it's great.
Yeah.
It's great for walking around the house. It's good for pre-bedtime ritual. But the actual practicality of sleeping in
undies under them?
No.
Okay,
and that's part of the enjoyment.
So the reason I've had this in the back of my mind for a while is that our dad wears a man nightie.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, I remember one night.
We'll probably have to check with him if he's okay with us
I
mentioning
have
that.
checked it. I've got something great to talk to you about. Don't worry, I've checked this first. But
and you can just come back next week.
So Dad, I remember once Dad's car alarm went off at the front one night, and we all ran to the front, and Dad, I'll never forget the figure of, if someone was no one was trying to steal Dad's car, but if they were looked up and seen on the balcony, the light was on. Dad was lit up like a fucking Christmas tree, standing in his nightie, just going, is there someone there? And I thought this must be the most unintimidating figure of all time. But anyway, I've recently been thinking, I'm not comfortable. I'm thinking I'm going to go a man nightie, but I don't want to go and buy one. I feel embarrassed asking for one or trying one on or whatever.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, go.
To mine? My man nightie is a women's nightie. So not sure if this episode or the finasteride episode is going to haunt me more, but yeah, it's true. It's true. From Muji. Very
Unbelievable.
good. Yeah.
So I'm at Maya trying to find a skivvy, and out of the corner of my eye, a lady, a lovely like girl, was trying to help me, and out of the corner of my eye, I glimpsed man nighties, and I thought, this is my chance.
What did the sign say? Man nighties?
No, they didn't. No, I just saw what it was. So I thought, I said to the lady, I might try a man nighty on, and she said, I don't know what that is. And I said, well, that thing there, and she said, oh, we've only got like triple extra large, and I said, oh, I want it to be really big and flowing, so that could work for me. I might just try it on. And so as I tried it on, I put the man nighty on and she said, how is it for size? And I could tell it was too big, but I just felt like I had to show her for some reason. So I opened the door and I'm standing in the biggest man nighty, nearly down to the ground. And she chose that moment to go. She said, yeah. Oh, I just feel weird not to. I'm just such a big fan of Dr. M. I love Dr. M so much. She said, Dr. M, as I'm standing in a man nighty. Oh. She chose that moment to tell me. So anyway, I did call Dad yesterday morning and said, we're going to, Em's here, do you mind if I want to talk about it? And Dad goes, well, I'll correct you there. It's actually called a nightshirt. That's probably why you can't find it.
Yeah, and it is a nightshirt.
And I said, oh, do you mind if I say this on the podcast? And he said, well, no, that's fine. But I think the significant thing you need to tell people is where they find them, because they are hard to find. He's like, yeah. So Dad says Maya. Everyone, if you're interested, you've got to go to Maya. Yeah. But that is, gosh, what a revelation that is. You and me with a site on tour, man nighties walking around the hotel.
It won't come on tour. Okay. It won't come on tour. I actually don't really wear it that much anymore, but it was, for a good couple of months when it was a bit colder. Loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Oh, I love the thought. I'm still searching.
Yeah. Anyway.
Thanks for joining us, Em.
Dr. M, so last year, for the whole year, you came on the show every month and you would often look back at older episodes and of ours, and you would choose a topic, something that someone had talked about, and expand on it from a psychologist's point of view, which you are, and which you'll do the same this year. But this episode, you wanted to do something slightly different. Mm-hmm. What are you thinking?
So I thought, particularly starting the year and coming off the back of everyone being on Christmas and having a break, that sometimes it's really useful to have a check-in to understand, I guess, what it means to seek support. So whether that means self-help or seeing a professional, and maybe to have some space to talk about what it's like to see a psychologist, what the process is, and I guess to get your feedback too on your own experiences of what that process is like.
Yeah, because we do often talk we talk so regularly about going to see a psychologist and the benefits of it, but it is quite an overwhelming or intimidating prospect.
Well, I get frustrated messages from people saying, you just mentioned how you see a psychologist, but how do you even find someone that you like, or how do you know that's the right psychologist for you, or how do you know should it be a counsellor? Should I be seeing who should I be? Yeah, so I think it's a really good one, because I think we do mention it's been very life changing for the three of us to see a psychologist, but I think maybe we're a bit flippant just saying, we got a great one. It's not that easy.
Mm-hmm. Look, just being really transparent, I think it is actually really hard, and I do want to validate and normalise, particularly in the current climate, that it is really tricky. And so I think it's important to look at the processes, how you can go about doing that. And for me, the first port of call really is your GP. Mm-hmm. Whether you are going to go down the path of seeing a psychologist, whether you're going to see another mental health professional, I think your GP really is the gateway to starting that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that'd be literally booking an appointment with your GP or any GP, and talking to them about how you're feeling and what your experience is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then
I'm guessing that's the conversation they'd be very used to having at the moment, especially at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I'm certainly even aware that it's very hard to get into a GP at the moment too, that's something we've got to keep in mind as well. But when you go to see a GP with the view of seeing a psychologist, that would be primarily to gain a mental health care plan, which I'll explain what that is. Mm-hmm. And when you are seeking psychological support under a mental health treatment plan, you must have symptoms of a diagnosable mental health condition. So what that means is that you wouldn't be eligible to get a mental health treatment plan if you were going just for mood boosters or, self-exploration or, things. So you don't actually meet the criteria to gain access to Medicare rebatable sessions.
If it's simply like, I want to be a better version of myself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Like you can still go, that's fine, but it's just
You'll have to pay.
You'll
Absolutely.
be paying for it.
Yeah. So to give some further background, a mental health care treatment plan is the government subsidised program that allows you access to Medicare rebatable sessions per calendar year.
Which is really incredible. Something probably not to take for granted. Like, that is pretty incredible. And on one hand, I go, oh, that's annoying that you can't get it paid for if you just want to explore yourself. But at the same time, it's probably good that people who really need it are the ones who get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's certainly kind of the intention.
Yeah.
So as it currently stands, and there have been changes that have occurred over the last few months in terms of the number of sessions you get per calendar year. As it currently stands, you get access to 10 sessions.
It was 20 for a while, wasn't it?
It was, During the pandemic, there was access to 20 and much to a lot of people's dismay, that has been changed and come back to the original 10 sessions per calendar year.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. So you see a GP, you get your mental health plan. This is, and maybe you do, but maybe you don't. Maybe that's not what, because I think a lot of people who would listen to this podcast, and I count myself as this as well, is just like, you might be thinking, I just want to go and see a psychologist because I want to explore all these things about me. I want to find out why I do the things I do. How can I be better for my friends or my family? And so for those people, you probably have to pay unless you've got some sort of anxiety or.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tricky one in some ways because we can all present with symptoms, for example, of low mood or symptoms of anxiety or symptoms of stress. And so it's really kind of up to the GP in some ways to make that kind of assessment. But if it's purely for self-growth, then that's going to be difficult, I think, to be obtaining a mental health care plan.
And will a GP be able to recognise whether you should go and see a psychologist versus a psychiatrist versus a psychoanalyst? Or
yeah, that's a really good question.
Thank you.
So I think first of all, it's important to kind of understand the distinction between the different professions. And just to start off with, psychiatrists are medical doctors, and their training is in medicine first, and then they specialise in psychiatry.
Yep.
Psychologists do not have most of them don't have a medical degree. You're trained very differently. The difference from, I guess, a layperson's point of view is that the psychiatrist can prescribe, a psychologist cannot prescribe.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So referral to a psychiatrist can often occur in conjunction with referral to a psychologist. And the psychiatrist, in an ideal world, can work alongside the psychologist in assessment and medical treatment. And the psychologist can be providing the counselling interventions.
Yeah.
So to give you some further background on what it means to be a psychologist, and I think this feels important, is that a psychologist, if you call yourself a psychologist, you're coming under a registered body. And so it's a highly regulated profession, and there are certain requirements you have to meet in order to be a psychologist. And at the moment, the baseline is a minimum of 5 years of study plus 1 internship year. That's like the basic, the bottom level of kind of qualification. A lot of people, and increasingly more so, it's 6 years of study, and then you can specialise after that. And then there's obviously more that you can do after that as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's important that we recognise that there is a minimum requirement to be a psychologist, and you can't just call yourself one if you haven't met those standards.
Yeah. Do people do that? Are there people doing that?
There are some people that have been found to be doing that. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that is the other thing, is like really checking in.
What a stressful life that would be.
Yes. Really checking in with what the qualifications are of the person that you're seeking as a starting point. I mean, it would be unusual if you were to be sent to someone and they're not actually a registered psychologist.
Yeah.
But you can check that. You can certainly check that.
Okay.
This may be going back a step, but I found that when I went to a GP on a couple of different occasions to get a mental health plan, I went there wanting help, and I didn't necessarily get the warmth and response that I wanted from the GP. It wasn't the most it wasn't a bad experience, but it also wasn't. I didn't leave feeling like, wow, this is gonna. That was a fulfilling experience, but it did lead to seeing a psychologist that changed my life forever. So the initial experience of the GP, although it wasn't really positive, it wasn't bad either. But I just would hate for people to go in a place where they're feeling like they need support and then feel like the experience of the GP wasn't that positive and then think that this path isn't for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I think that, thank you for sharing that, Josh. I think that's actually not necessarily uncommon.
Yeah.
And, there are some incredible GPs out there that are really mental health trained and very aware.
Yeah.
And so, of course you can go to your GP and that can be a really helpful and very validating experience.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, there are some that aren't as well versed in that process. And so, that can certainly leave you feeling kind of disheartened.
Yeah.
Or unheard.
Yeah.
Especially if this will be the first time you're telling someone outside of
exactly. And
your
I just
family.
So you feel like this is a big step, and then you get there and it's like, In one case, I was going there in a pretty low state and I had a panic attack, I think, at this point, or maybe that was I'm getting confused with times. But anyway, I went and I was telling the GP the symptoms and what I was feeling, and he just didn't even look at me and was just looking at the piece of paper and just saying probably depression, yep, tick, and then yep, probably anxiety problems, yep, tick, and was just like listing diagnosis and ticking things, and I was sort of thinking, God, I was so confused.
Yeah, looks in your ear with the torch. Looks like there's some sort of childhood trauma in there. Yeah, it's a shame.
And as you said, I've since gone back to get a new mental health plan and seen someone else, and it was a really great experience. But I guess I just wanted to let people know, and this might be a recurring theme as we talk more about this, that just because it doesn't feel good at the start, it's not a reason to stop. Keep going down the path.
Yeah, and certainly, not extrapolating from that experience with your GP to the experience with the psychologist.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So in some ways we can see it as the gateway, and then you can be very self-directed in how you and who you see and how you see that person.
Yeah.
Just jumping back to the different types of therapists. So there's like psychologists, psychiatrists you mentioned, and there's others, obviously. I remember before I'd gone to see a therapist, in my mind, I only knew of what I saw in movies. So in my mind, I'm expecting to go into Dr. Melfi's office from The Sopranos. Like I'm expecting like this wood-panelled room with a couch, and it's the Maria who I saw it's completely different. She's just in like an office, and it's like with laminated posters on the wall, and it's because she does a lot of family work and I remember being like slightly disappointed because it wasn't a movie set, it wasn't lit beautifully. But so Dr. Melfi in The Sopranos, for example, or so many like Analyze This and so many of these films, is that is that psychology, or is it just a mesh of lots of different things?
Yeah.
Like,
well, I mean, it's probably difficult to say in terms of like movies and things, but and also I should note that there are different qualifications in the States too, which is where a lot of the movies come from. So I can't really speak to the exact differences there, but there are certainly different types of mental health practitioners that are providing mental health support that are not psychologists. So I do really want to give a big kind of mention to the work of counsellors. So from my understanding, you can go and get a Bachelor of Counselling, for example, or a Master's of Counselling, which is very specific to you coming in for a counselling appointment and undergoing counselling. And there are some incredible counsellors.
And that's like a 3 or 4 year. 3 or 4 years to study, is it that right? So it's quite a comprehensive undertaking.
Yeah. And, I have some colleagues certainly that are counsellors, and the training that they received is just exceptional. But the difficulty is that you can't access Medicare rebatable sessions through seeing a counsellor.
Right.
So that can be cost prohibitive for some people, certainly, but it is an avenue that I think can be underutilised.
And is it easier to find counsellors? Are they more available, do you think? Because this is the problem at the moment. It's hard. There's so many waiting lists for psychology. Yeah.
Look, I'm just being clear. I probably can't speak to the waiting list capacity for counsellors at the moment, but there is a national body of counsellors that you could have a look on, and it gives you a database of all the counsellors that are on there.
Oh, we'll link to that.
So yeah, counsellors are definitely another option to have a look at. And
Are
then
they like? I'm just trying to how are they different to a psychologist? Like, what's the what would you expect? Was the treatment style different? Is it just that they aren't quite as qualified, or?
Again, this is, and I apologise to any counsellors out there that can correct me on this, but from a clinical psychology point of view, we're trained in clinical assessment and treatment of mental health conditions.
Right.
And so very much coming from maybe even more like a medical model in our training. Mm-hmm. And then from what I understand about counselling, that it is very much interpersonal skills. So, being able to be with the person in the session, it may be less clinically focused. Mm-hmm. So they're not necessarily diagnosing conditions from a psychiatric point of view, but are able to provide some really great interpersonal supporting and it certainly is counselling. Mm-hmm. This is kind of this movement from this place of difficulty or despair into a place of better functioning.
I'm 2 years into my counselling degree, but I stopped when we had Elsie because it was just way too hard to do everything. And it was the first 2 years was all about like understanding the therapeutic process, and it was so fascinating. Like, it was amazing.
Yeah, it's really about the interpersonal relationship between you and the client.
Yeah. That's it.
Brilliant.
So that's counselling, and then there's also, you can also go and see certainly mental health trained social workers, and OTs do an incredible job.
Oh, OTs are amazing.
Yeah.
Occupational therapists.
I didn't know. I was just heard the title occupational therapist and was like, oh, they give therapy to people who have occupations. I never really thought about it properly. And now I know what they do just because of having met a couple and seen a couple in action. They are amazing. Mm-hmm. They're so practical, but they have such a great understanding of what practical things can help people with different issues they're having in their life. Just endless list of practical ideas to help people and support people.
So integrating into your regular, strategies and practical things that you can integrate into your life.
Yeah,
on a daily basis, kind of thing.
Yeah, I know. I now know a occupational therapist called Michelle really well, and I cannot believe how good they are at what they do. And not that I never thought they would be, but just seeing the amount of practical solutions and strategies that they come up with and resources they provide to help people with whatever it is they're struggling with, incredible resource.
And I think really undervalued,
totally,
and that we're not necessarily aware of.
Yeah.
Of what they can do.
If I knew that was a thing when I was at school, I reckon that's what I would have wanted to do as a job, honestly, if I'd had heard about it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You'd be fantastic at it, actually.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, you'd be incredible.
Oh, thanks. That's very nice. Do you think I would
not
be?
that I really know.
I think you'd give it your best.
So yes, I just want to. I think they're great.
Yeah.
So, but with occupational therapists, so who would go and see an occupational therapist?
I think once you have a diagnosis, they're really good to then help you with that exact strategies for whatever that diagnosis is. So I know someone who supports people who are struggling with depression, providing practical stuff for them to do, and
so they would go and see the occupational therapist regularly and check in with here are some tools.
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
Now I'm jumping in with knowledge that I don't really know either, but my understanding of them with a group that I worked with for a job in another life, that they often will come out to there's a whole subsection of occupational therapists that will come to you into your house, into your world, and look at your world and work with the world that you're in, rather than you going to
an office or
your house and come up with strategies that will benefit your life.
That's cool.
Looking at everything in your world and your surroundings. We should try and get an occupational therapist on the show one day.
Yeah, I agree. I'm so underrated. What about life coaches? There's a lot of life coaches that you see popping up on, whether it's social media or...
Yeah, there certainly are. And there's so many differences, I think, in terms of their qualifications and how much training they've done in that. And, again, I can't really speak to that profession in particular, but it can be an avenue, certainly. And I think that is actually probably an avenue too for people that are really looking for self-growth.
Yeah.
Or
and like
motivation
personal
or-
development and kind of goal setting in particular. That can be an area where they really are focused on.
So this is going back to what you were talking about before, where it's sort of linking to that mental health plan thing. People who want to better themselves or explore more, as opposed to people who are having symptoms of something clinical.
Yeah, I mean, it can be. I mean, certainly you can see a life coach if you do have something clinical, but I think from my understanding, it's more around kind of this kind of proactive changes to promote kind of well-being and much more kind of goal-setting oriented.
Yeah.
From my understanding.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so you've seen the GP, and the GP's maybe said, "I'm going to recommend you go and see the psychologist." Then what?
So then you make a call or an email or a request to a psychologist. And I want to also mention that your GP is not necessarily going to know psychologists that are available. So as it currently stands, you can have a referral from your GP, and it doesn't have to be addressed to a specific psychologist.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's then really kind of up to you who you want to see. And my recommendations are, obviously first asking the GP whether they have someone that they refer to regularly, because there is a relationship between the GP and the psychologist. But if they don't, like, in all honesty, I think word of mouth is the biggest recommendation. So if you have friends, and there are so many of us that are seeking help, if you have friends that have had really positive experiences or that can recommend psychologists, I do think that's a really good starting point.
Can I just ask one question? Could you potentially, like, if there are people who are really, really in a low place, and the thought of going to the GP, making the appointment with the GP, then going there, then going to do all the research. Could you do a GP on telehealth and get the referral that way?
Yes, absolutely. And you can also do it without a GP referral.
Okay,
so you don't have to go to the GP. You can
just start calling.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I did.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago.
You can see someone straight off the bat. You don't need a referral to see a psychologist.
You
I
just don't
really
get
want
a
to be
mental
clear.
health plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can go as a private client. If you have private health insurance, you can certainly claim sessions back on your private health insurance if it has that particular cover for psychology. But you do not need a referral to see a psychologist.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, I actually, the second time the third psychologist I saw it, just went straight to her. And then she said, I think we're going to need to do a bit of work. So I'd suggest going to a GP and getting a mental health plan.
Yeah.
So it actually was the reverse in my case, second time.
So absolutely you can do that.
Yeah.
And also this is a really kind of nice point to explore the psychologist that you're seeing in a first, like whether it's an email or whether it's a phone call. You can gauge your sense of fit in some ways if you're having a phone call or even in the email correspondence when you're setting up that appointment time.
Having been through this process a little while ago and then written about it, it felt to me a lot like dating. Like it really did feel.
Yeah.
I had two pretty bad dates. The first one, the psych said before she said hello, she said, "Can I get you to pay before we start here? Because it's so far to walk back from downstairs." And I was like, you've got to be kidding me.
It's a weird first impression, yeah.
Yeah. And then the session was okay, but so that's just, and then the second one, the guy said, I'm going to drink coffee while we talk, so just checking that's good with you, and then made himself a coffee. I just felt like someone I'm about to share my everything with should know that it's nice. It's probably just common courtesy to ask if I'd like one as well. I didn't want one. I didn't want one, but
I thought it was the manners that really got to you.
Yeah, it was just he just spent ages making this coffee, and it was like this huge process. He was getting angry because it wasn't quite working properly, all in front of me, and then didn't say, "Do you want one?" And I just thought, I don't know,
this is not for me.
Yeah, and it might be some people might like that. Just I'm not here to make friends. I'm not here, but I needed to feel like a warmth from the person to feel like I open up, and so. I know you're about to give us something a little bit more helpful than that, but to me, it just felt a bit like dating.
It absolutely is. And I think this is because, as a psychologist, I'm also a human. And I think that's important to recognise that, behind the title is another human, and we don't fit with everyone. Not everyone is going to like me, and equally I'm not going to like everyone just being a human being. And so similarly, when it comes to your treating professional, there has to be, and I know this is hard, there has to be some persistence in knowing that I can find someone that is a good fit for me.
Especially at the moment when you might wait for that person for 2 months and you finally get to see them and then it doesn't work. You're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. So on that basis, I would actually do your research. And so, going onto their website and having a look at how they describe what their approach is. So, for example, like this may be apparent in the way I talk, I am not a really very strongly directive, solution-focused psychologist. I'm not the tough love psychologist. And some people want that. And so that would not be a good fit in my experience.
Yeah.
So, kind of really thinking about what is it that I'm looking for? What are my needs? So what are my preferences? Would I prefer to see a male or a female? Are there questions that you would feel more comfortable kind of exploring based on race or ethnicity or any kind of marginalised group? For example, sometimes seeing someone from the same community as you can feel safer. Absolutely. So I think they're really important questions to think about, before you even kind of make contact with the psychologist, doing your research and having a think about what it is that you're needing and who would allow you to feel comfortable before you even meet them.
Yeah. Is there ever a situation where you'll meet up with, because like you say, the therapist is a human as well, and there has to be a connection of sorts. But is that entirely up to you as the client, or could a psychologist say, "Look, it's been really nice to meet you, but I don't think I'm a good fit for you"?
That's possible. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And because when psychologists are not, unless it's a mandated client, you're not mandated to see the client.
Yeah.
So there are certainly circumstances where you're mandated to attend therapy, and that's a different circumstance.
Yeah.
But sometimes it can be, and it's a very difficult conversation to have, that it may be, I'm not sure if I'm the right fit for you, but, and I would explain the reasons why, but I have someone that I would really recommend you see.
Yeah. And ultimately that's for the better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the way that I would normally couch it is that this is your time and your money and your life. You need to be making sure that you're getting the best out of this experience.
Yeah.
And it may not be with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, where are we up to in the process? So you've found the psychologist and you go on and you're in the waiting room.
Yep.
And then they call you in.
Yeah. And so how are you feeling at this point in time?
Oh, nervous.
For me, I was nervous. Yeah. I was excited.
So excited.
Yeah, I was actually excited.
So
now that I
excited.
think about
Actually, yeah. But it depends on which time. I've been to 3. The last time I was kind of desperate by that point.
Right.
Yeah. It was after I'd had a proper panic attack and you recommended Maria and I saw her. So, and I'd had that panic attack, I reckon, the day before. So I was pretty scared. So I needed support and she couldn't have been better. But yeah.
Yeah, she's awesome. She's awesome.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah, I think I was nervous, but I was also, I think I was excited because I was just, at that point, I wasn't going because I hadn't had a panic attack and I wasn't in a dark place or anything. I was just hungry for information and I was hungry for growth. So I think I was coming more from that place. But one thing I will say, and that I often say to people when they ask me about seeing someone, is I remember after the first 2 sessions of seeing Maria, seeing a psychologist, I felt like I did most of the talking. And I was just essentially just telling her my story. And she was writing a lot of stuff down and listening. She would ask some questions, but I was just talking. And I remember after the second session, I thought, well, this is a bit of a waste of money. She hasn't, firstly, I'm not fixed. Secondly, she's not giving me any advice or I'm just talking the whole time. So I often tell people that because what then happened for me is that I realized that, she's just getting a lay of the land, very important. So then she could then give proper advice based on actual information that she needed from me. But I say that to people because often you might go to a psychologist, spend a session there and you've talked for an hour and think, well, I want to go see someone else because I want someone to help me now.
Mm.
And it can take time.
I think that's such a good point, and I think it's really a necessary point, and that is that, you know, looking at your expectations when you're coming in, there is no quick fix.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so it comes with like this necessity for patience to kind of trust in some ways that it will unfold. But from a clinical point of view too, like, and I say this in, you know, when I first see a new client, is that for me, at least the first 2 sessions is kind of an assessment, like me getting to know you, but also you getting to know me.
Yeah.
And so that's the point where, you know, I will ask you a lot of questions and I will write down a lot of things. And equally, I encourage you to ask a lot of questions.
Mm.
And, you know, and this is why too, it's kind of important if you do feel uncomfortable, to really actually express that to your therapist, which is tricky, I know. But if you can stick out the first couple of sessions, unless there are some really kind of strong warning signs that this is not feeling okay, I'm just thinking about 2 possible scenarios. And the first is that off the bat, you get a really strong sense that this is not the right fit for you. Mm-hmm. Like if there's a really strong gut feeling, like for example, that what showed up for you, Hugh, like this is not a good fit, then like obviously pay attention to that gut feeling. But if it feels as though what happened in the session was that I got exposed to all of my pain and discomfort, and that makes me want to run away, that's a different experience.
That's such an important point.
Yeah. And so, you know, I find it helpful to tell clients that what to expect when you leave the session. So, you know, after the session, you might feel really tired. Like that's a very common experience. Really tired. You might feel like almost more vulnerable, a little bit more sensitive. Conversely, like you could also feel really energized and really hopeful. You know, my view really is that I would hope that after your first session you would go away feeling heard. That feels really important to me as just a basis, that you felt heard and that there was some sense of hopefulness there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my psychologist is called Anita and she's just phenomenal. And one of the things that we've worked out, and I don't know if this is for everyone because I've had a psych who said, no, absolutely not, you can't do that. I like take notes, but I also record our sessions on my like voice memo thing because what I was finding was I would have these, I'd do, the structure of ours generally seems to be I'll speak for like 45 minutes and the last 15 minutes she'll just say incredible stuff back to me. And I would go home, be so excited and say to Penny, oh, Anita said, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was something like, oh, I wish I could remember what it was. She said so much good stuff. And I just sort of forget the exact wording for some reason was really important to me. So I said to Anita at some point, do you mind if I record these sessions? No one will ever hear them. It's just for me to listen back to. And she said, yeah, of course, that's fine. I suggested it to a different type of therapist for someone else at some point. And I said, no, absolutely not. You're not doing that. And I understand, I guess, why they'd be uncomfortable with that. But that's kind of how my sessions have now structured. It's like I talk 45 minutes. She summarises everything and makes so much sense of things that I'm talking about. And I have found the more that I say things that are just on my mind, like the more honest I am, because sometimes you catch yourself trying to be likable to the side, or trying to impress them, or trying to you just find yourself monitoring a bit what you say. I find the more you just say what's on your mind, and even if it's an uncomfortable thing to put out there, the more information they have to work with and the more they can help you, I've found.
Or often like saying the thing that you think is meaningless, but it's just the thing that you're thinking about, for me often would turn into the thing that was the most profound.
Yeah.
So I might go, like some sessions you go in thinking, okay, well this big thing happened yesterday, so that's clearly going to be the topic of conversation. And it might be, but then other sessions I remember going in and I've got something booked, you know, that I booked weeks ago. And I was like, okay, well, I'm feeling pretty good today. So I don't know, this is kind of probably going to be a waste of money because I'm not stressed. And they were pretty much always the best sessions.
Yeah.
Because I would literally sit down and be like, I don't really know what to talk about today. And I'd be stressed about that because I'm like thinking this is a waste of money. And particularly if you've only got 10 sessions and you're on this mental health plan. But I would often find that there was always something that you think is like small or unnecessary to talk about, and it pretty much, for me, in my experience, would always lead to something that was buried deep in my subconscious from my
really
past.
profound. Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's why I do that thing that I've just accepted as normal. That's why I do that thing. And I'd never planned on talking about it, but it was just about just saying something I was thinking, even though I didn't think it was worthy of therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
I always felt like whenever because obviously you have to book in advance, and it was kind of like booking a haircut. Like you book a haircut when your hair looks bad.
Yeah, yeah.
And then on the day of the haircut, it always looks really good.
Oh, yeah.
You're like, actually, I don't need this.
Yeah.
And I always felt that about when I'd book in an appointment.
Oh,
and
yeah.
on the day, I'd be like, I feel great.
There's a phenomenon called waitlist therapy, which is that your symptoms start to improve in the waiting.
Oh,
Wow.
Really?
So and so it's not uncommon. Like you book in at a time when you're feeling really overwhelmed or kind of in crisis, and then the closer you get to it, you're like, no, actually, I'm pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is
and
that? Why does that
Absolutely.
happen?
I don't know if it's I
Is
don't
it just
actually
the
know
natural
the
ups and downs of our lives, and we at our low point we go, I need help right now, and just naturally sort of low is sort of come up again, and then we,
And I think also
Why am I
that,
answering that question?
well, no, I think that's very true, and I think part of it is too that there's absolutely a big degree of being vulnerable, and that we as humans really kind of have an aversive response to that. So the closer you get to going into therapy, the further we want to move away from the pain.
Yeah, okay. So you'll start making, sort of tricking yourself to a degree.
Yeah, I think
of
that
like,
can definitely happen. Yeah.
I'm okay. I don't really need to be vulnerable.
Yeah. Or do I really need this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really not uncommon. But I would, if you booked it in at a time when you're feeling really overwhelmed, even if you're feeling better genuinely, I really strongly recommend you still do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, if you don't get anything out of it, I understand there's an expense, absolutely, and that's certainly a privilege to be able to access that. But, if you can, give it a shot, just see what kind of unfolds.
I don't know how many sessions I've had in my life, but I would say once I found a psychologist that was the right fit for me, there was never, no matter what I felt like going in, there was never a session that I regretted going to.
No.
It was always an incredible experience. Like some were incredibly profound, some less sort of, you're not going to have the epiphany of a lifetime every session, but it was always worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes and maybe for certain, certainly for me, I might have 3 or 4 sessions that aren't game-changing sessions, but it's almost like they were necessary build-up to the profound epiphany that happened in the 5th one. And I wouldn't have, I couldn't have got to the thing in the 5th one if it wasn't for the slow build-up and the patience.
It reminds me so much of that. The analogy I have in my head, I agree with that. It reminds me of Game of Thrones, where I feel like Game of Thrones, a couple of episodes, nothing happens. And you're like, there's nothing happening here. And then all of a sudden, the next episode, oh my God, everything happens. And that's kind of what it feels.
Wedding.
That's so
Yeah,
true.
it's the wedding. Yeah,
You can't have a red wedding every episode. Yeah, exactly.
And I think that really ties into what we know about the evidence in terms of treatment change or in terms of symptom change. And there has been some interesting research come out more recently, but for a very, very long time, and I think still to a very large extent now, the biggest indicator of change was not the treatment approach, but the therapeutic relationship.
Yeah, right.
So the changing factor is your relationship with the therapist rather than the specific strategies or interventions that are being used.
Gotcha.
Which I think is really interesting.
Does that mean because the therapist is also getting to know you?
Yeah, so if we look at what's called the therapeutic alliance, it's basically how strong the sense of safety and trust is in this relationship. And so if we think about trust and safety as being so primal for growth, that if that's not in place, if we don't have a strong established sense of rapport with someone in a session, then the likelihood of change is really diminishes.
Yeah.
So another thing that happens, I don't know if this is a common thing or if there's a name for this, but I found myself, when you like hang out with someone during the day and you have a really great time with them or something really good happens, you're just naturally thinking about them later on and you want to like text them. I just noticed quite a few times if I had a really great session with Anita, I'd like want to text her and go like maybe she's mentioned an article or something that I should read, and I want to text her and like just say, oh, read this article, this is so good, and I reckon you'd like this, or like even just like tag her and stuff. Not that I know she's on Instagram, but you just have this like but you can't just message them at like 8:30 when you're on the couch watching television and say
there's boundaries.
Like there are boundaries, but it's a weird one because they have such a profound impact on you, and you have this like love for them for the impact they have on you. But then it's a strange, like that's a strange type of situation in a relationship.
It's such a unique relationship, absolutely.
Yeah. Because you must think about you must have moments where you have profound moments with your clients and then you must be thinking about them later on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like this is really kind of talking to the human part of us, like in terms of our connection and relationships, is that you know, like, and that's actually an interesting thing when you stop having that, that feels to me, when you stop caring, like that's a big burnout indicator as a helping professional. But so there are boundaries around this, and it's kind of tricky in some ways. But for me personally, there's generally no kind of social contact. There's no social contact in between the sessions. But if people have concerns, they're welcome to email me in between the sessions. I do encourage people to write things down. So, if things are happening in between the sessions, or often I'm giving homework for them to practice or to do, so to write down your reflections and things. But the interpersonal relationship is like so unique, absolutely. And it, normally when you develop like a really strong connection with someone, the impetus is to connect more. And so like, for example, that the urge shows up. The urge shows up to want to share this like really interesting thing, or but you can hold on to that. You can say like, I noticed I was this thing came up and I was thinking about you during the week, and that can also be
so
really interesting.
That?
Yeah, 100%. Okay. Yeah.
And it is like, it's really the one relationship that you have where at the start I felt like I had to keep saying, like I felt like my instinct saying, when you're having a conversation with a friend and you're just talking about yourself for ages, and then for me, I'm like, sorry, I've just been rambling about myself.
Totally.
But with this relationship, you can just talk about yourself the whole time. And that's the point. Like, that's the whole thing.
Yeah. And I have to say, for people pleasers, it's very uncomfortable and unfamiliar.
Oh my God. The amount of times I have actually said, but how are you going? Like, I can't help it. I just can't help it say it, and she'll just completely ignore it.
Yeah. Jam saw a therapist for a while, and I think she was a psychoanalyst. And the way that, because I was already seeing Maria, I think, and Maria was very personable and, really similar to you, and just like, and we would talk and have a conversation before the session started, I guess, just as I'm walking in, and she'd like, we'd have tea or coffee just to, But the woman that Jam was seeing was a psychoanalyst, and it was very formal, and there were very rigid rules around talking before. So she would open the door, and at the start, Jam would be like, "Oh, hi, how you going?" And the psych would say nothing. She'd just like wave for her in, and there'd be no talking, no personal interaction at all. And she would just sort of spend most of the time listening, and that was the relationship. So there was no Jam, never knew anything about her personal life ever, and that was the way it was. That was the way she wanted it. The therapist wanted it. So I just say that so people know, like, but she still got a lot out of it.
Yeah.
What's a psychoanalyst?
So psychoanalysis is based upon Freudian therapy, and the principle that underlies that, well, there's a lot actually, but is this kind of notion of the blank slate, that the psychoanalyst is a blank slate upon which you kind of come to your own insights and conclusions. And so things like that kind of traditional notion of lying on the couch and you just talking. So it's like this kind of stream of consciousness, and the analyst is there as this blank slate, not to provide any kind of interpersonal feedback aside from kind of the nodding or that sort of thing, and definitely no self-disclosure.
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
that's one form, and for some people that can be very helpful. But if you're wanting really kind of active therapy, like strategies and things, then you want to be probably looking for different treatment approaches. So things like CBT, so cognitive behavioural therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, EMDR, schema therapy, DBT. I mean, there are a lot. And again, like looking on the website around what the approaches are. So a giveaway
What's DBT?
for dialectical behaviour therapy.
What is that?
Oh, look, it's commonly used for presentations like borderline personality disorder, but it's to do with emotion regulation skills, interpersonal skills, distress tolerance, and mindfulness.
Right.
It's an incredible therapy and very well empirically validated. So that's certainly kind of something that can be really useful for a lot of people. So there are lots of different approaches, and I think something that is important is like if you're looking for strategies, then you need to be kind of probably asking the therapist what their approach is and like what's their view on homework, how active are you in the sessions, those sorts of things.
Okay.
How many clients do you have over the age of 60? Are you able to answer that, or
Not very many.
Yeah.
But there is a whole field of psychiatry and psychology that is for seniors. There's a big area of research around that, and it's such an area that is so needed because we know depression in particular, loneliness, anxiety is so prevalent in that age, like well kind of like as you're moving into elderly years. Yeah.
I just felt there's such a big barrier to people who are in their 60s and 70s. I feel like it's such a taboo thing to do, or you just don't do that. You don't need that. We'll be fine. I'll be right. Everyone else should do it, definitely. Great. Everyone else, I'm so happy everyone else is doing it, but I don't need to. I feel like I know so many people who would really benefit from it, but they just wouldn't. It just, I've got this far. I'm not going to dig up all that shit, so there's no point. And it's to me, it doesn't, these are people who understand why it would be a good idea and love that people that they love are doing it, but would never do it themselves. I just wondered if that's something you had sort of encountered.
Oh, look, anecdotally, definitely. Like in my personal life, definitely I can think of lots of people like 60 and above that, think it's a really great thing, but wouldn't themselves do that. I have some incredible clients that are over that age, and it's just an absolute joy and a privilege, to be honest, to work with them because you're also working with more life. Like so much more life is occurring in that period of time. So, I think that it can be incredible work. And, maybe if you're like as a listener, you have a parent, for example, a starting point could be like even something like listening to this, like sending them podcast episodes or sending them.
Take out the man 90 bit. I don't think that's going to happen.
Just as like an entry point to know that this is not as scary as it might seem, or not as
overwhelming. Or
If you're reluctant to go, I imagine that there's a part of you feeling like you're going to be forced to share things that you don't want to share and do things that you don't want to do. It sounds like everything you've been saying today, if you work hard to find the right person that you want to work with, then it's about you at the end of the day.
100%.
And you're not going to be forced to do things or say things that you don't want to do. It's your journey.
Yeah, and a good therapist should be checking in about that.
Yeah.
Even checking in at the end of the session about how did that feel for you, any like questions, concerns, getting feedback is really important. Yeah. I think. Yeah. There is something I just wanted to add kind of in like that finding of the psychologist and then or actually in the experience of seeing a psychologist. And I just wanted to mention a couple of red flags to kind of pay attention to, if something's not feeling right. The biggest foundation for me is the right for confidentiality and privacy. So that is the cornerstone of therapy, is that these sessions are confidential with the exception of there being any potential harm or danger to you or someone else. And potentially court subpoenaed requests, but with the exception of those two circumstances, your sessions should be confidential. And so, if you hear, for example, that that your therapist has mentioned it to their name has come up somewhere else, or you've heard that this hasn't remained confidential, then that's a real problem, and that that is a big red flag.
Yeah.
And you can actually take that a lot further, if that's occurring. And I would really kind of bring that up with the psychologist too, if you experience that.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the things that I feel, you spoke before about trust and safety being the biggest thing. That's what I feel, what I love most about seeing a psychologist. I feel it's so safe and I trust, there's so much trust there, I know it's staying in this room.
Yep.
And that's really important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the cornerstone
So I say
of
some
good
weird
therapy.
stuff.
He says some weird stuff on the podcast. Like, cannot even begin to imagine what's going on behind those doors.
Because sometimes I want to play like Penny Little Grab of what I need to set it. I'll say to Nature, I'll just play this to Penny. And then I'm like, just be careful which part I play in. It's pretty fucking weird things.
Oh, stop there.
Anyway, sorry.
So the other thing I wanted to add about that too was therapist self-disclosure. And so obviously from an analyst point of view, there is no self-disclosure in there. A red flag in a therapy session for me would be if your therapist starts to disclose their own personal difficulties or to kind of move, it's like this sense of like, well, I did this and this worked, or this isn't really working for me, you know, really kind of checking in with, there's like an icky feeling, I think, that comes up when your therapist starts to give their experiences of things in a way that actually isn't very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't really tend to disclose a huge amount unless it's, you know, really pertinent, and particularly if that issue is resolved.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So because I imagine as a therapist, maybe a therapist might feel like they'll be able to relate to the client better if they can be vulnerable themselves and reveal like that, you know, their own imperfections or how they're struggling with things or have struggled with things in the past. But you're saying that's a bit of a red flag.
Yeah, look, it's a tricky one to kind of define, but I would just, you know, kind of pay attention to, like, is my therapist actually talking more than me in the session and talking more about themselves than listening to me?
Okay.
Yeah. That might be a better way of kind of understanding
that. Would be like if you're in there and you're like, well, I'm not here to solve your problems.
Yeah,
like,
Yeah.
Not that I've experienced it, but I could imagine that feeling of like, well, hang on. I've actually experienced it with a different health professional when I went and saw someone in a non-mental health thing, and they started telling me all their problems. And I was like, well, hang on, I'm here for something else. I don't need and it was even felt a red flag in that environment when they weren't there. It wasn't mental health related at all.
Yeah. So I think that's important to pay attention to.
I've always had a feeling like I wish psychologists could divulge a little bit more than they do.
Yeah.
I've always felt like I just like a little, maybe that's just me, but I just feel like.
Because you're looking for a friend.
Maybe. I feel like,
Yeah.
I totally understand and agree with what you're saying, but I've just so often thought, I feel like you could get me to, if you give me a little bit about you, I would trust you a bit more, which would make me a bit more open to sharing, I think is what.
Yeah,
and
I
so
don't feel that at all.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like if you started sharing things with me, especially things that were problems for you, I'd be like, well, this is broken now.
Yeah, because the roles are specific. Yeah.
And this is also why your friends are not your therapist too.
Yeah.
Because there's less objectivity in that relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's even worth talking about quickly, which is I think people might feel like, well, I've got really good friends and family that I can talk to about what I'm going through. And I trust them. They've got my best interests at heart. Why do I need to go to all the trouble of finding a therapist, spending all the money to do it when I've got a good support network? So what's the difference? How can you?
And then just to add to that as well, I was on the way to do a regional show once, and I just had ABC Radio on the regional station, and they were interviewing a psychologist. I didn't catch their name, and I wish I did, but they were talking about how good it is to speak to friends the second you notice something's not good. They said it's just as powerful to share what you're going through with a friend than seeing a psychologist straight away. It's like, is that a good stepping stone? I should talk to my friends first, or is that?
Oh yeah, I mean, connection, absolutely. And again, like, research is so clear on the role of social support in terms of it being a buffer for any kind of mental health conditions. So like, it is more paramount in my mind, like your support networks outside therapy, actually. And therapy then is this kind of adjunct to your life. But your life is being lived outside of that therapy room. So, you know, being able to invest in and seek support from your friends and your family is so important.
Yep.
And like, for me, the kind of like to see people leave and finish therapy means that they're now getting, in some ways, all the support they need and all the kind of sense of grounding from their relationships outside of therapy, that I'm not needed anymore. And that feels like such a win, you know, that like you can take from these sessions what you need and then kind of feel safe and comfortable with the relationships that are really important to you. Yeah.
So then what can you gain with a psychologist or any therapist that you probably can't really gain with the social?
I think as a first thing, like, it's objectivity and perspective taking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, your friends are so usually, not always, but like your friends are so invested in you and your well-being, and so therefore are often very prone to giving advice that is in support of you. But sometimes, like when we zoom out, there's a bigger experience going on that's not as biased, or that we need to kind of uncover those biases.
Yeah, that goes deeper than just the actual thing at hand. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, our friends, as much as they're incredible supports to us, not always trained in understanding, like, symptom presentation and treatment interventions. And
I was just thinking about that. Like, I feel like sometimes you hear people diagnosing their friends and it's like, well, they all seem to be getting the same diagnosis that the one you know about kind of thing.
And Dogger is a great listener. He is. But, you know, he might not have the training that's required.
Yeah, and so often in our friendships, the dynamic is that I will tell you my experience, and then people might jump in with advice, or so often is that, like, when you're telling your story of difficulty, then your friend might come in really, like, with good intentions and say, yeah, that happened to me, and this is what, like, you know, this happened to me, and then blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden we've lost connection. And it becomes more about us relating to our own separate experiences in the same space.
Yeah.
Ryan, you described your sessions to me once with Maria as a one-on-one lecture on psychology, and the topic is me.
Yes. Often that's what it felt like. It felt like she was, you know, every now and again she'd jump up at the whiteboard and she'd be like drawing diagrams and like explaining things to me. And I felt, because I'm feverishly taking notes. And yeah, it felt exactly like that, where I'll bring something up and then she'll explain a theory to me or something to me in scientific psychology terms. But yeah, the subject is always me, and which suits me fine. But it's helpful to me, to my own personal situation. But then I'm also learning so much about ways to help other people. So, like, I'm getting the tools that I need to be able to go, like, okay, well, if a friend or family member is struggling with something similar, I feel like I'm being armed with this information that I can take into the outside world, and I can be the Dogger. You know, I can give unsolicited advice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to know where self-help fits into all this. There's so many podcasts and
some
books.
really good ones.
Some really good.
Yeah, some really convincing good ones. And, you know, sometimes they're not even trained professionals, but as long as it's fun, right? Yeah. You know?
So I'm interested to know where they fit into the whole picture, because I think for some people that's a great place to start.
Yeah, and particularly on the back of, you know, talking about wait lists, that it's really hard and also expensive to get in to see a professional. So I think self-help certainly has its place. And so, yes, podcasts can be considered self-help, books, even, I guess, you know, to an extent, social media, so, you know, clips on TikTok and things like that.
Quotes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. But I guess I want to really emphasize that it's self-directed. So it is very much self-help, like you're directing the information that you're receiving. So it's not professional treatment. And I think that can be sometimes maybe a bit confused at times, but it is very self-directed and self-chosen. So just, you know, with respect even to my role here, you know, I'm a psychologist that's coming on to talk to, you know, to you guys, but also to talk obviously to everyone listening. And so in this context, although I am a psychologist, I'm not your psychologist. So I'm not providing clinical services to you as a listener. So in that sense, this is really kind of considered more like a self-help, self-directed learning.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And I guess there's also, you need to check who's talking, who's written it, what their qualifications are. I mean, the fact that I was allowed to publish a book would suggest that anyone can publish a book. So you don't need to check.
You're halfway through a counselling degree.
True. So I do think you need to pay attention to who it is.
Absolutely. And I think, if you're really looking for, so I guess there are two things. There's psychoeducation, which is information about psychology and about the human mind and the human brain and the body. So that is, providing you with information, which is very much what this podcast is doing. So, we could consider that I'm providing some psychoeducation, which is kind of general information. But if you really wanted to take some time to reflect upon change, then I would really probably encourage people to go down the road of using workbooks. So, for example, CBT-based workbooks, ACT-based workbooks, DBT. I mean, these are all treatment approaches, and I apologise for the acronyms. But actually looking at, if I can't get in to see a psychologist, I can do my own self-directed work with the support of evidence-based information. And so looking at, you can easily Google these sorts of things, but looking at treatment approach-based self-help books. If that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they're the things where you'd be writing down and reflecting and challenging yourself rather than just purely consuming.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow.
How long can you expect to be in therapy for? When you get into it, are you thinking, I'll do this for a year or for 2 years or?
Yeah. It's a really tricky question to answer. And I think it depends a lot upon, your presenting concerns.
It'd be great to get a concrete number, though, that works for everyone.
Well, I mean, the research is tending to suggest that kind of 12 sessions may be, a point at which we can see some change in symptoms, but, not necessarily. So, some solution-focused therapy can be, we can see change and ongoing change, pretty rapidly. It's a really individually based question.
I won't ask them why we only get 10 sessions.
Yes, don't ask me that question. Yeah. So it's really varied. And I think in terms of you having ongoing therapy, I think it's really a discussion you want to be having with your therapist around when is it time for me either to decrease the frequency with which I'm seeing my therapist. So, maybe you start off seeing them weekly or maybe fortnightly, and then you kind of start to extend it to monthly check-ins, for example. So you really want to have a discussion around what is going to be a concrete marker for me that I am not needing to attend so frequently. And then, how will I know these goals have been met? And that's the point at which we can kind of consider maybe stopping therapy.
In my experience with Maria, my psychologist, and Josh's psychologist as well, at a certain point she encouraged me to try to think about other forms of therapy. So sort of a nice way of breaking up with me, I guess. But but I think she probably recognised well before I did that, because I'd been seeing her for years, and so she was probably, well, no doubt, was spot on that I needed to start thinking about, rather than just I got comfortable, I think, and it forced me to start thinking, what else could I do? Because almost just because I just booked in all these sessions with her, I was like, oh, well, as long as I'm seeing her, then I'm fine. But I probably started, she could probably tell that I was probably plateauing in my growth or something like that. And yeah, so I think for me, it wasn't necessarily you should stop getting therapy at all or stop thinking about things. It's other things that I could do and think about. Yeah. I just started listening to Joe Rogan. That seemed to help. So,
Got all the answers you
yeah,
need.
it was really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's something that you want to have a chat with your therapist about, and each different therapist and therapeutic approach will have different kind of answers around when it is to stop. In some instances, like psychoanalysis, maybe you don't ever stop at all. So it's certainly something you want to kind of get some information about, I think. Yeah.
Right. Is there anything else
I do have a question, because I've only done it once and I haven't done it since, but going as a group or with other people, or group therapy, or
it's absolutely something I wanted to mention, and that is the utility and evidence base of group therapy. And I know off the bat that many people will be like, no, not for me. There's not a chance you're going to get me in a group. But two things. that group therapy, if it's conducted by a clinical psychologist or a psychologist, is Medicare rebatable. If there is access to Medicare rebatable sessions for group therapy, and it is unbelievable. And having done groups myself, the change and transformation that happens in groups is unbelievable.
And groups would be families mainly? Is that
no?
I was thinking of something else when I was asked the question. I was thinking of like family.
Oh yeah, so you can
family,
absolutely do family therapy. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, family therapy, unbelievable.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
So what kind of groups? Like could Bridget, Josh, Ryan and I go? And
yeah, you could join a group. So like for example,
I'm not saying we need it, but I'm just interested.
So for example, there's lots of different kinds of group therapy that is available. You go, as an individual and you join a group, and it's run, usually by a psychologist for specific purposes. So like, for example, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy is an 8-week program. You go for 2 hours every week for 8 weeks, and those sessions can be Medicare rebated,
right?
Separate to your individual sessions.
So I'm picturing like an Alcoholics Anonymous style group thing. Is that sort of what it's like? Yep. Okay. Wow.
And
that appeals to me.
It's like, to be honest with you, it's like both. For myself as a therapist, like as the facilitator, it is so rich and rewarding because like we're primed to connection. Exactly. Yeah. And so then you have people sharing similar experiences, and we gather such a sense of shared humanity. It's just like the
powerful
transformation that can happen in a really well-led therapeutic group is unbelievable. And they are quite a lot more accessible than getting individual therapy at the moment. So if you can't get in to see a psychologist, really open up your mind to searching for group therapy.
That sounds amazing.
Awesome.
It's such a great avenue, particularly when there's not much availability for psychologists at the moment.
And on that, we've acknowledged a few times how hard it is to get into a psychologist. And off mic before, you were saying about wait lists and getting on. So I thought maybe it's worth bringing up.
Yeah, so off the bat, just really acknowledging it is so tricky to get in at the moment, and particularly to get in with ones that are well regarded. So my advice is put your name on waiting lists in more than one place. So put your name on waiting lists everywhere, because and particularly with changes in Medicare, we might see a higher turnover of clients this year, to be honest. So you may actually get in more quickly than might be anticipated. But, you can also too follow up with the psychologist. Have you had any cancellations? Where am I on the waiting list? Kind of getting a sense of that. But don't just put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
Great.
Dr. M, I mean, we could talk, there's so much we haven't covered, I feel. There's so much we could talk about, but
I would like us to one day attempt the podcast world record with him, where we just, however long that goes for, we just sit here and talk. Something tells me it's 25 hours. I don't know why I'm thinking that, but like we could do that.
Yeah.
We could do that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, Dr. M, I feel like we've just cracked the tip of the iceberg maybe on this, but thank you so much. We've all been to therapy for years, but I learned a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
From that. So thank you so much.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Yeah. And just so nice to be in person, really.
Yeah.
It's the best.
Welcome back.
So good.
They said in person, which would have been like the opposite of like, that's where you're from.
In person.
That's when you come to Perth, that's where you're in person. It's in person.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
See you soon.
The Imperfects is hosted and produced by Hugh Van Cuylenberg, Ryan Shelton and Josh Van Cuylenberg. Our executive producer is Bridget Northeast. This episode was filmed by Andy Poole and edited by Jamison Moore.